Welcome inside the War Room. I'm your host, Andrew Valancourt, and we're back today for episode 50 of the Dynasty War Room podcast. So big show today, episode number 50. So thank you all for tuning in, making this show possible. Lasting this long is a nice accomplishment here for our little podcast. So I appreciate you for tuning in. And on today's show, we're going to be talking about tight ends. So we're continuing our series in the startup rankings. This is our fourth episode in a row talking about startup drafts. We covered quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers already. And so today's show is entirely focused on tight ends. Now, I have my top 24, and I've broken them down into different tiers, just like we did with our previous sets of rankings. And so we'll jump into that. But before we do, I just want to remind everyone, as always, make sure you are following this podcast on your platform of choice. We're on every platform out there. So whether you're a Spotify user, Apple, YouTube, you name it, we are there. So go give us a follow or subscribe on YouTube. Our handle there is at the Dynasty War Room. Or at Dynasty War Room, same with Twitter or X, Dynasty War Room on Twitter as well. So go give us a follow there. You can ask us questions, interact with us there on social media. You can find us on Facebook as well. And with all that being said, let's jump on into today's episode, breaking down the tight end position for your startup drafts. So tier 1 let me just preface with this. So as always, we've been taking data from dynastydatalabs.com. They have startup data from the past month of Dynasty startup drafts, real live drafts that have been going on over the past month. And this show is coming out a couple days later than usual. We try to have these episodes come out on Mondays. Holiday weekend, stuck at the airport due to a delay in travel there. And then I got sick coming back. So we're pushing the show out to Thursday, unfortunately. However, lots to talk about with these tight ends. And Dynasty Data Lab, now up through February 19th, is the data that we're using here. And we're going to talk about where these tight ends are actually going in drafts, compare that to my own rankings, and then break down by tier as well. So tier 1, two different players. Probably the two guys that everyone would think of, Brock Bowers, Trey McBride, are going to be the two tight ends here at the top of the list. Brock Bowers, to me, is the clear number 1 tight end in Dynasty, 22 years old. He's going first off the board in startups at the tight end position. He's being drafted right now in Dynasty Leagues, 12-team Dynasty Superflex Leagues at the 108. So this is a very high draft selection. He's going in that mid to late first round. He's going ahead of some of the more big name quarterbacks. He's going right in that grouping with the elite wide receivers. And I think it's 100% deserved. I mean, Brock Bowers was incredible as a rookie. He had terrible quarterback play, didn't have a lot of other weapons on this offense, and he still put up just an absolutely insane tight end season. The number 1 overall player at the position as a rookie. And although in points per game it was George Kittle, but for overall tight end scoring and the tight end premium scoring, which is what the leagues that I play and use, which is you get an extra half point per reception if you're a tight end. And he had 319 points in that scoring format, which is right up there with the best of the best among other positions. So really kind of highlights just how good Brock Bowers was this season. Now, Trey McBride, who is 25 years old, my number 2 tight end, he is also going as the number 2 tight end off the board in Dynasty startup drafts. He's being selected at the 205, so 5th pick of the second round in a 12-team league. And I think that's also very deserved. I mean, he, in tight end premium scoring, 305 points last year, was the tight end 2, and he didn't even find the end zone all that often. So this is something where if he's able to just score a few more times, this is something where he and Brock Bowers might just be rotating on a yearly basis as to who is finishing as the tight end 1 overall on a year-to-year basis. So I have no problem with either one of these players in the first 2 rounds of a startup. They're the only tight ends that are in this range, and for good reason. And they're just a great addition to your dynasty team, because if you're getting a player like Bowers, like McBride, that's this young, this established in their offense. And imagine what your team would look like. You have that player plugged in for the next decade. I mean, think if you had Travis Kelce on your roster since he came into the league, you'd be sitting pretty good with the success that he has given you over the years. And the same can be said with some of the other elite tight ends from throughout the years, whether it's Rob Gronkowski for a long time, with Zach Ertz was a top tight end. I mean, we've seen these players that when they really hit, they're true difference-making options in fantasy football. And it seems to me that both Bowers and McBride fit into that category, but especially Bowers, given that he is only 22 years old. Now, tight end 3 for me off the board is Sam Laporta of the Detroit Lions. He's 24 years old. He is also the 3rd tight end off the board in startup drafts, going at the 312, so the final pick of the 3rd round. And I have him in tier 2 all by himself. So Laporta gets his own tier, and I think that this makes a lot of sense given where he's being drafted, and then taking a look at the rest of the position. I really just don't know who could possibly go into this category with Sam Laporta. I think if you were to make an argument, you could say that Laporta belongs in that same tier with McBride and Bowers. But to me, I just think from a year-to-year basis where you're talking about high-end outcome, we know that Sam Laporta is clearly very talented, and then he can be, a top 2 or 3 tight end on a year-to-year basis. But I think the ups and downs are going to be a little bit more prevalent with Laporta compared to Bowers and McBride, because there are other elite options in the Lions offense. There is Amon-Ra St. Brown. There's Jahmyr Gibbs out of the backfield. There's Jameson Williams. And so it's not like Sam Laporta is the clear number 1 option in his offense like Bowers and currently McBride still is. So, Marvin Harrison might have something to say over the next year or two with the Cardinals offense, but it's something where I think the two players can still easily coexist, just like Sam Laporta at number 3 certainly can still coexist with St. Brown. It's just something to be aware of. We saw kind of that drop off a bit this year with Jameson Williams' breakout. So, but Sam Laporta still extremely talented, somebody that if you want to take this position, a tight end at the 3-4 turn, I think that's still pretty solid value. To me, I am generally of the opinion in startups that if you're not getting the elite of the elite, I tend to just wait on the position and take a tight end later. And so you're going to see here when we get into these rankings what I mean by there's just going to be so many options available to you in the mid to late rounds that it makes it tough to sacrifice one of those early picks for a tight end, especially in this case when it's not going to be for the best player at the position. So it's, Sam Laporta at the back of the 3rd. While I think the value is fine, I don't know that it's a pick that I would necessarily make given the way the landscape of the position is. So moving on to our 3rd tier, which is a pretty big tier. So I have my tight end 4 is TJ Hockenson, and this tier is going to go all the way down to tight end 11, which is Kyle Pitts. So tight ends 4 through 11 are in tier 3 for me, and TJ Hockenson is at the top of that group. He's 27, and he's also the consensus 4th overall tight end going in drafts right now, but he's being taken with the 9th pick in the 6th round. So a big drop off from Sam Laporta, who's going at the back of the 3rd right now. So almost a full 3-round drop. And I think that makes a lot of sense. TJ Hockenson is a very talented player, but hasn't necessarily, shown that he's going to be an elite number 1, number 2 tight end in the league. At least Laporta has done that. Laporta obviously has the age advantage over TJ Hockenson. And coming back from the injury, Hockenson was fine. He was all right. I was a little bit underwhelmed with his performance, especially given that he had a pretty solid schedule for the position over the back half of the season. But he was still fine, and I believe in J.J. McCarthy. I think that the Minnesota Vikings offense is a good enough offense to sustain multiple high-level fantasy players. We've seen it with Kirk Cousins. Kevin O'Connell is a very good offensive coach, so I do have some trust in that system. And given the fact that they play in the NFC North, a lot of high-powered offenses, high-scoring games, I think that T.J. Hockenson is still very much a valuable tight end. and he was 17th in fantasy points per game in traditional PPR scoring. So it's not the same as what I would use in my leagues with tight end premium, but it gives you a bit of a baseline there to kind of understand where he was despite the injury. And you would like to see better than 17th for a player that's supposed to be an elite, player at his position. And his numbers just didn't really back that up last year. So he is number 4. But it's kind of by default. I have to be honest, I don't necessarily love this range of tight end. I think they're all very similar in terms of ceiling, and obviously some of these players are going to be riskier than others, which is why I think Hawkinson is at the top of the list. Between the age and safety, he seems like a relatively low-risk prospect here. And some of these other guys either are older, so you're not going to have quite as many years of them, or they just carry a lot more risk. So next up is going to be George Kittle. He's my number 5 tight end. He's 31 years old. He's also the number 5 tight end off the board in Dynasty drafts right now. He's being selected with the 4th pick in the 7th round. And again, I have him in tier 3. And he was a tight end 3 in overall points in tight end premium formats. 276 total points. He was the leader in points per game in traditional PPR scoring, and just a really great year for George Kittle. Now, he's demonstrated year after year that he is an elite tight end in this league. He is starting to get up there in age, though, 31. I don't know if he's necessarily going to repeat the year that he had, given that the 49ers will likely get Brandon Ayuk back from injury. Ricky Pearsall is going to be in his 2nd year in the league. Juwan Jennings had a nice season. Christian McCaffrey should be back. So Deebo Samuel might be moved on to another team, whether it be via trade or, cutting him. But I'm a little bit worried about Kittle maintaining such a high level of play, at least in terms of fantasy production. So still a very good player, of course. And he was a player that I was wrong about last offseason. He was somebody that I was not particularly interested in drafting, or he was a player that I was selling in a lot of situations. So I did not necessarily nail that with him because he did have an outstanding season. And so some of that, skepticism is gone because he kind of proved that he still is an elite player. But you're still a little bit worried about the age. And but he does end up here at 5 simply because I don't know who would go ahead of him. And I think you're seeing that with that big drop-off in where these players are being drafted in startups after Laporta, where it's just that huge drop down to the 6th and 7th round before you even get to this next group of players. So still a good player, but probably not somebody that I would be drafting a lot of. But he does come in at number 5 in my rankings. At number 6, I'm going to go with a show favorite, and that is Tucker Kraft, Green Bay Packers tight end. He's 24 years old, and he is the consensus number 9 tight end. So I do have him a few spots ahead. I have him at number 6, and he's being drafted at the 905. So I think that is very, very good value for Tucker Kraft, being able to get him in the early to mid 9th round of a startup. I have him in tier 3. He was the number 10 tight end in tight end premium scoring last season, and I think he can be better. I think he will certainly be better than that. He took over that lead role in the Packers offense. It's an offense that doesn't really have a clear number 1 wide receiver, which opens the door for Tucker Kraft to take up more of that role in next year's offense. Now, I still think they need to add a receiver, but Kraft is going to be one of those guys that has shown that he's a consistent producer in this offense, and if he can just find one more gear next year, he could find himself among the elite tight ends in the league, especially for fantasy football. So, consensus number 9, I have him at 6, and to me, this is simply about longevity, future, there's some projection here. Obviously, this is not necessarily a safe ranking because there are a couple players after Tucker Kraft here that might have, better immediate, short-term production, especially the player I'm going to talk about next. But I definitely do like the future outlook for Tucker Kraft, and I think he fits into this tier of players in this third tier. At number 7, I'm going to go with the veteran Mark Andrews, Baltimore Ravens tight end, and he's 29 years old. He comes in at number 7 in startup rankings as well through Dynasty Data Labs, and he's being drafted with the 3rd pick in the 8th round, and he was the tight end 6 last year in tight end premium scoring with 216 points. So still a very good player. Obviously, we all remember that drop in the playoffs, but still a very productive player. He had a very slow start to the season, which I think scared a lot of people. And, there was a big fear of, is he done? What can we expect from Mark Andrews moving forward? And I think for the most part, he answered a lot of those questions throughout the season. I don't think he's going anywhere. This is still Lamar Jackson's favorite target, but I don't think it's quite as dominant he doesn't have quite as big of a handle on that role necessarily as he did before, where it was very obvious it was Mark Andrews and then everybody else on that offense. Now I think we've seen the emergence of Zay Flowers. We've seen Rashad Bateman step up, and we've also seen Isaiah Likely, show that he is a very talented player that's capable as well. So a little bit more, parity among this offense. But Mark Andrews is still a very good player. And at age 29, I would expect that we're still going to get a handful of good, solid seasons from him. And I think this is among the more safe targets in this, 5 to 10 range of players. And I think is a very quality pick in the 8th round. At number 8 in my rankings, I have David Njoku from the Cleveland Browns. He's 28 years old, and he's the number 10 tight end among consensus ranks. So another guy that I have a couple spots higher, and you'll probably notice as we go through that tight end so far is probably one of the positions where I have the most disagreements among consensus startup data right now. Wide receiver I thought was a very strong set of rankings from the Dynasty community as a whole. I think that in general, people are pretty good at drafting wide receivers, and even running backs, largely very good and accurate. But to me, tight end is where things are a little bit different. And some of that comes down to just the position in general is a lot tougher to predict on a year-to-year basis because there are so many players in this middle range that are all kind of the same. And whether you have, the tight end 8 or 9 versus the tight end 13 or 14, they're not going to be that different. And so that's why you probably will notice some larger, disparity among these rankings compared to consensus. So Njoku, 2 spots higher. So not quite as big of a jump as Tucker Kraft, who I had 3 spots higher, but still someone that I think showed he has a lot of gas left in the tank. And Cleveland's quarterback situation hopefully will be better next year. There's some rumblings about Kirk Cousins headed over there. Who knows if that's necessarily a good thing? They also own, an early draft pick, so there could be a rookie involved here. Jameis Winston wouldn't be a bad choice for fantasy purposes. I wouldn't expect that to happen from a real life winning games perspective, but Jameis Winston has always been good for receivers and tight ends in fantasy. So we'll see what happens there. But David Njoku was the number 11 tight end, and but he was much better on a points per game basis. He was somebody that missed a number of games this year, but showed that he's still among the elite tight ends and can be a major force in this offense. Jerry Jeudy is now the wide receiver 1, and it's really Jeudy and Njoku, pretty good duo there. And I think that having him at number 8, drafting him in the middle of the 9th round, I think Kraft and Njoku in the 9th round, along with Kyle Pitts, who's also going in the 9th round, who we'll talk about in a minute. There's some good value, I think, to be had once you get into this 9th round, especially past the 9th round. So this is why I kind of like the idea of waiting on the tight end in a startup, because once you get to this 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th rounds, there's so many tight ends that are still quality players, and you're not having to burn a high-level pick that you could otherwise be using on a quarterback or an elite wide receiver. And so that's just kind of my general philosophy. But Njoku checks in here at number 8 in these rankings. Number 9 is going to be Dalton Kincaid. He's 25 years old. He's the number 6 tight end off the board, so I have him 3 spots below consensus. I actually have him just flipped with Tucker Kraft. He's being selected at the 7-12, and I don't really know what to think about Dalton Kincaid because he had every opportunity this year to kind of take over and really be a force in this offense. And, there were some injury concerns and whatnot, but it just was not... We never really got those elite performances from Dalton Kincaid. It was a lot of just mediocre games, and he is a bit of an older prospect. He wasn't drafted all that long ago. He's only played 2 seasons, but he is 25 years old, so it's something where I don't really love Dalton Kincaid. I'll be honest. It's one of those things where I think he's being drafted too high. I think he's been paired with Josh Allen now for 2 seasons, and we saw a lot of flashes in the rookie season, and that's why I still have him in the top 10, because I do think there is a lot of potential here, but Buffalo is probably going to add another receiver. I just am a little bit worried about him turning into more of an afterthought in this offense, and just being one of those guys that, falls into kind of that Cole Kmet type of range where like he's a decent tight end, but he never really turns into anything special. And so I still have him ranked this high because I do think that there is a high ceiling, but I do think that there is a good chance he just ends up being more of a floor play that often disappoints you. At number 10, I have Pat Freiermuth, Pittsburgh Steelers tight end. He's 26 years old. And his consensus ranking in startups right now is 17. So this is probably the player that I have ranked the most different. I have the largest gap here between my rank and consensus startup rank among these players that we're going to talk about today. So 7 spots difference. He's being drafted with the 7th pick in the 12th round. And to me, that just seems way too late. He was the number 9 tight end in fantasy last year, 201 points in tight end premium leagues. I have him here in tier 3, and to me, he represents a much safer option than some of these other players. Like if you were to ask me between Dalton Kincaid, Kyle Pitts, and Pat Freiermuth, who is the safest of those 3 players? To me, it's Freiermuth. So if you just want to make sure you have somebody that's going to score 8 to 12 points per game and give you a solid floor, Pat Freiermuth is your guy. Now, is he going to turn into a top 3, top 4 option and have humongous weeks? Probably not. I don't think he's that guy. Whereas Kincaid or Pitts certainly could be that type of player. So I think that's kind of that risk reward that you have to balance in your drafts of what type of player do you want on your team. And it could come down to just the makeup of your roster. Do you already have a very high risk type of team? Do you need some of that stability, or do you need somebody that can pop off for a big week because you've played it safer at another position? You just have to evaluate that with your team as you go. And I often place a pretty high value on players that I know I can rely on and are not going to destroy me in a week that I have them in my lineup. And so Freiermuth, I know, is at least going to give me a solid baseline. And so for the 12th round pick, I think that is very late. I think he belongs, at least in probably the 10th round. And I think the 12th round is a steal if we're able to get Freiermuth in the 12th. Especially looking, Pat Freiermuth versus Dalton Kincaid. I have them back-to-back in my rankings. They're going 5 rounds apart in a startup. Is Pat Freiermuth 5 rounds worse than Dalton Kincaid? I don't think so. I don't think that the fantasy production that you're going to get from Freiermuth is 5 rounds worse than what you're going to get compared to Dalton Kincaid. And Kyle Pitts, who we're going to talk about in a minute, I struggled a bit with ranking Kincaid, Freiermuth, and Pitts because I think you could, shake them up and put them in any order you want because, again, we talked about the risk reward and whatnot, the age factors there, but they're all still, young players. Pat Freiermuth is only 26. it's not like running back where Freiermuth is going to hit a cliff and retire and when he's 28 or 29 like a running back. So I just think this is a player that is being undervalued because people are a little bit worn out from kind of the boring player that he maybe is. But there could be a quarterback upgrade, quarterback change. We don't really know what the quarterback situation is going to look like in Pittsburgh, but we know that they don't really have any receiver help outside of George Pickens right now. So as it currently stands, Freiermuth is the clear number 2 option in that passing offense, and I think that's a piece worth having. So at number 11 is Kyle Pitts, who we've talked about a little bit. He's 24 years old, and he's my final player in Tier 3, and he's being drafted as the tight end 8 off the board. So I have him 3 spots below consensus right now, and I've thought about moving him up. It's something where, again, I think I could easily see a place for him anywhere from 8 to 11, but again, this is something where safety comes into it a bit. And I think Kyle Pitts is just an extremely risky pick at this point. He has shown that he's not somebody that you can count on. But at the same time, he's had some success. He is extremely young. He's only 24, despite him being in the league for what feels like forever. And he's going in the 9th round. So, David Njoku and Kyle Pitts are the players that are, and Tucker Kraft are the 3 guys all going within a few picks of each other. In the 9th round, and I like all 3. Just because I have Kyle Pitts down here a couple spots below consensus is not something where I just don't like him. I think this actually could be kind of the right time to finally buy into Kyle Pitts because the price tag is significantly lower than it's been in the past. So, not to fall back in the trap again, but I do think that there is still some value left. And it's why I have him in Tier 3 and not Tier 4. And I think that, I would, consider him where he's being drafted. And it's something where in a startup draft, if you want to take a Kyle Pitts or a Dalton, well, I would prefer the value of getting Kyle Pitts a couple rounds later than a Dalton Kincaid. And then you want to pair him up with a Pat Freiermuth in the 12th. And then you have your risk in Pitts and your safety in Freiermuth. I think that's a great pairing. I think that's a very good and smart way to handle your tight end position in a draft because you're going to have a player you can play that still has some value, but you're not burning an early pick on the position. So the other thing to note with this is I fully expect Tyler Warren and Colston Loveland to end up in this similar type of range once they're drafted in the 1st round. So I don't know where exactly I would have them fall into these rankings yet. That will largely depend on where they go and, what the situation is. But I could see them being anywhere from, if Tyler Warren or Colston Loveland go high enough in the draft. I mean, it's even possible we're talking about somebody pushing TJ Hawkinson for 4th on this list. But I think the safe assumption is that both of those 2 guys will end up somewhere in this 5 to 10 range. So I just want to throw that out as well. But let's move on to Tier 4, which is another pretty big tier. There's not as many tiers here for tight end as there were for receiver or running back. But Tier 4 starts with our number 12 tight end, which is Travis Kelce, and it goes down to our tight end 18, which is Jake Ferguson. So Travis Kelce at number 12, 35 years old. He's the 14th tight end off the board in startup, so I have him a couple spots above that, and he's being drafted with the 2nd pick in the 12th round, and he was the number 5 overall tight end in tight end premium scoring, which still very, very good, very productive. It felt worse because he just wasn't the same player as he's been. I mean, we saw in the Super Bowl, we saw throughout the season that a few more mistakes just didn't necessarily seem like quite the same guy, but it makes sense. He's 35. So the big question with Travis Kelce is we don't know how many more years he will still be playing. So you could be drafting him as a 1-year tight end option. Could be 2 years. I'd be surprised if it were 3. I think that 1 to 2 more years is what probably makes the most sense here. And as long as he's on the field, I'm going to expect production. and you don't have to draft him as an early tight end anymore. This isn't a player that you got to spend, you don't have to take him until the 12th round. He's going near that 11-12 turn. And for a player that can be a top 5, top 8 tight end in redraft, I think that getting him this late is pretty good value, because sometimes when you're getting this deep into the positions of the players in this 12 to 18 range, you don't really know how many good years of production you're going to get out of those players. So why not take the veteran that you're going to get a top 10 season from, and you just see what happens after that. You can make trades, you can draft someone in your rookie draft, and maybe that's the way you go. If you're a Kelsey manager, you pair him up with a Warren or a Loveland or a Fannin or whoever in your rookie draft. But I think this is still a pretty good spot for him, and I think that people are willing to move on from Kelsey because they don't want to be left holding the bag. But 12th round value here in the startup. He's going in the same round as Evan Ingram, Cade Otton, Cole Kmet. All players that Pat Freiermuth, all players that I think are fine. But I think the only one that I would take in a startup ahead of Travis Kelce would be Freiermuth, who I have ranked at number 10 here. So Kelce comes in at number 12. At number 13, I do have Evan Ingram. He's 30 years old. He's number 16 in startup ranks, so a couple spots behind where I have him as well. And this is, again, the same sort of argument about the aging veteran. He's been a very productive player. He's coming off an injury. We'll see if he's back in Jacksonville. I know there could be some contract issues there, so something to keep an eye on. And if you're an Ingram manager, you probably want to make sure you get Brenton Strange on your team. But for now, I do have him at number 13. He was the number 12 tight end in PPR scoring on a points per game basis. So still a good player when he does play. It's just a matter now of health and situation, and obviously the age factors in. At number 14, I have Cade Otton. He's 25 years old. He's number 15 in startup position ranks right now, and he's being drafted at the 1205. So again, like I mentioned, there's a whole bunch of players here going all in the same few picks. So it's really a matter of personal preference come draft time, and team composition about whether you need an older veteran that can be a starter, whether you're looking for somebody to be a backup that maybe has a few more years. So that all is going to play into your decision making when it comes to who to take on the clock. If you don't have a single tight end on your team at the time you get to the 12th round, Travis Kelce is probably a better pick for you than somebody like Cade Otton, or even an Isaiah Likely, because you need somebody that's going to start for you and score points. But if you already have, a Sam Laporta or a Kittle or a Kraft or somebody else that's going to be a starter for you, having a good high floor backup like a Cade Otton makes a lot of sense. And he had a pretty good year this year. He was tight end 14, 170 fantasy points in tight end premium scoring. And I think he just showed you that he can be a solid option. I don't think he's ever going to be an elite player. I just don't think he's that kind of athlete. I just don't think he's that, type of player. But still a very serviceable tight end, which for my tight end 14 is what I'm looking for. At 15, I have Isaiah Likely, Baltimore Ravens tight end. He's 24 years old, and he's the number 12 tight end in startup drafts right now. So I do have him a few spots behind that ranking. And to me, this is simply a matter of I don't like to wait on players. If I'm drafting in a startup, I don't necessarily want to have to wait a year or 2 or 3 before this player becomes a starter. And sure, Isaiah Likely gets a pretty good amount of playing time for a backup, but he still is a backup behind Mark Andrews. So until that changes and Mark Andrews moves on or is somebody somewhere else, I just don't know. I think that his season where he was the number 18 tight end, I think is a bit propped up from the giant week 1 he had, where he had, the 30 fantasy points. And I just don't know that that's someone that deserves to be ranked higher than 15th, because he certainly is talented. He's young, and could he have a bright future where he's a starter? Absolutely. But I don't want to wait around for that, so I'm not necessarily willing to take him at the beginning of the 11th round where he's going. He's being picked at the 11:03, so I don't love it. there, I think it's a little bit early, but still a talented player, and that's why I have him at number 15. At number 16, I have Jonnu Smith. So he is a free agent. He may or may not return to Miami. He's 29 years old. He's the tight end 13 off the board in drafts. So like Isaiah Likely, a couple players here that I have below their consensus rank. And to me, this is a combination of a few things. Age obviously factors in, but also this was really the one really good season that Jonnu Smith has had. He was the tight end 4. He was incredible for fantasy. He was an awesome player that you were able to get for virtually nothing last offseason. So it's a really good example of just finding veteran value in the tight end market. And he's a solid player, and he very well could have another good fantasy season or two. But I think there's too much up in the air right now in terms of where he's going to play, and could it be a one-year wonder? I certainly don't think he's going to exceed his season from last season. So I think 16 is a good spot for him. He's going with the 5th pick in the 11th round. I would rather have a number of these players that are going in the 12th, which is why I do have Smith ranked behind Kelsey, Ingram, and Otton. So that's my 2 cents on him, but certainly a nice veteran player that if you have, I would probably just be holding on to. He's not somebody that I'm really looking to trade. I think you just milk him for as much value as you can get on the field and in your roster, and be happy that you got a nice veteran tight end that's still producing. All right. Still in tier 4, tight end 17 is going to be Cole Kmet. So Chicago Bears tight end, he's 25 years old, and he's the 18th tight end off the board, so only a 1-spot difference from my rankings, and he's being selected at the 1208 in startup drafts. So I think that's more than fair. I think this is a solid late-round target. I don't know that I would feel great about having him be my starter. I think he's one of those players that is a nice backup to have on your team, and he was the tight end 20 in tight end premium scoring last year for total points. He'll be 26 years old in March, and Cole Kmet is a very interesting player to discuss because he certainly has shown flashes of being a very good player, but he also disappears at times. And I don't know if that's Caleb Williams. I don't know if that was just the Bears offense. I don't know if it's Cole Kmet. And so because of that disappearing factor, I have a hard time ranking him any higher than where he is. And I don't know that his ceiling is all that high, but I'm optimistic that with Ben Johnson there, that they can get Cole Kmet involved, just like they did in Detroit with Sam Laporta. So I think he is someone actually that, could represent some value. I think a lot of people would be willing to move off of Cole Kmet this offseason, and if you can get him for, a third-round pick in your rookie draft, I think that's a pretty fair trade to make, and I would be happy to have him on my roster in a backup capacity. My number 18 tight end and the final player in tier 4 is going to be Jake Ferguson. So he's 26 years old. I have him ranked much lower than his startup position rank right now. So the consensus rank for him in startups is 11, which I think is way too high. I am very surprised by that ranking, to be honest. I think 18, where I have him kind of in the same range as Cole Kmet, makes a lot more sense. He is being drafted with the final pick in the 10th round. So, again, there are just other players that are going in the 11th and the 12th that I like more than Jake Ferguson. And I will preface that by saying, he's being ranked at number 11 in these startup rankings, but his actual draft ADP is not egregiously different than the players going right behind him. So I think this is just another example of there's a lot of players in this tier that are all very similar, and you could rank them in a different order every day, and I think it's fine. But I just think of this group, having him at 11 is too high. So he's 18 for me. He was a tight end 23, struggled without Dak Prescott, and it's one of those situations where I just don't know how talented Jake Ferguson is. I don't know that he's necessarily someone that I think is going to be a consistent top 10 tight end option. Now, I think he'll be better next year with Dak back, but I think you're probably talking about a guy that's, just a 10 to 15 type of range player, which is fine. I mean, that certainly has a place on your team. It's a very good high floor backup or, very low end tight end one. But I just, I'm not that excited about his draft price, and I don't think he's somebody that I'm going to have a lot of at his current draft position. All right, moving on to tier 5, which is my final tier of players here. So I've tight end 19 through 24 are all going to be in tight end, are all going to be in tier 5, excuse me. And the first player in this tier is going to be Ben Sinnott. 22 years old. He was the rookie from Washington, where he teamed up with Jane Daniels to do almost nothing as a rookie. He barely saw the field. He didn't do anything for fantasy. He's being drafted at the 1401, so the first pick in the 14th round. He is the 20th tight end off the board in startups, so pretty similar to where I have him. And it was a tough rookie season, right? I mean, we all were hopeful that Ben Sinnott would have an immediate impact, but he got the Trey McBride treatment from Cliff Kingsbury, where Zach Ertz was brought in, and Zach Ertz was awesome. If Zach Ertz were not in his mid-30s, he would be on this list. But he, it's just one of those things where as fantasy managers, you hope that Ben Sinnott is able to take over that Zach Ertz role in this offense next year, because if he does, I think he's going to be great. It's just a matter of, is he going to get on the field? Is he going to have that role? And so that's where in the 14th round at that 13-14 turn, I think this is an absolute smash pick, because it's a very high ceiling upside play. Now, he certainly could bust and be nothing, and that would stink, but for somebody that you'd be taking in the 13th or 14th round, it's not exactly like you're passing up on a lot of other great options. So I think it's absolutely worth the risk, and if there's a player on this list that has the potential to go from, the latter half of these rankings into the top 12 next year, it is certainly Ben Sinnott if he becomes the starter for the Commanders. Another player that was a rookie and that, had this one actually had a bit of a nice showing, and that's Jatavian Sanders, Carolina Panthers tight end, and he's 21 years old. He'll be 22 in March, and he is the 21st tight end off the board in startup. So, again, like Sinnott, one spot behind where I have him ranked. He's being drafted at the 1403. So very similar range to Ben Sinnott. I do prefer Sinnott because I believe that Jaden Daniels is a much, much, much better quarterback than Bryce Young. But Jatavian Sanders at least did a few nice things on the field as a rookie. So in that regard, I don't think there can be a ton of separation between these two players. But Bryce Young did finally show that he might actually be a real NFL quarterback. And Jatavian Sanders would have a place in this offense, and he's so young. So I think in this range of the draft, you're probably looking to take a shot on somebody that has some high upside, and that's where I like these two rookies. At number 21, I have Dallas Goedert. So the Philadelphia Eagles tight end. He's 30 years old. I have him 2 spots behind consensus. He's going at tight end 19 right now in startups at the 1310. And again, so very similar range to Sinnott and Sanders. I would prefer the two rookies just due to age and upside. But if you're looking for just a stable veteran that you can hopefully get another couple years solid production from, I think there are a number of good options to choose from, all in this similar range, if not later. I think that Dallas Goedert is going at the back of the 13th. There are other veterans that I would probably prefer to target. Goedert was tight end 27 this year in tight end premium scoring, and he's fine. He's just a fine option. That's really all there is to say. But I do prefer some of these other veterans who we're going to talk about next at their draft cost. So while I have Goedert ranked 21st, I do have Dalton Schultz and Hunter Henry at 22 and 23, respectively. So Schultz, 28 years old, Henry, 30 years old. Schultz is tight end 24 and Henry's tight end 25 in consensus startups right now. And they're both going in the 16th and 17th rounds. So the 1609 for Dalton Schultz, the 1705 for Hunter Henry. So 3 to 4 rounds later than Dallas Goedert for a players that I think are very similar. I think that there is not that big of a gap between those three guys. In fact, for draft cost, I think you could make the argument that Hunter Henry in the 17th is a better value than both Goedert and Schultz. So you could, I like all three of those players pretty similarly, which is why I have them ranked 21, 22, 23. And when that's the case, I will aim for players that are going the latest in the draft, which in this case would be Hunter Henry. Now, Schultz does have the 2-year age difference there between Goedert and Henry. So if you're somebody that wants to ensure you have a couple extra years at the tight end position, Schultz might be your preferred choice among those three. But Hunter Henry showed that he has a pretty good connection with Drake May. He was a tight end 12 last year, despite how bad that offense was. So I think there's a pretty good shot that Hunter Henry could be another top 12 option at the position, assuming that Drake May takes another step in his sophomore season. So somebody that's going that late, I think that's a really good, valuable late round option at the position for somebody that, despite his age, is still going to give you some good production. And that's really hard to find in the 17th round of a startup. At number 24, and the final player in these rankings, is going to be Theo Johnson. So also was a rookie, 24 years old, or he's about to turn 24 this month. So rookie from the New York Giants. He is the consensus number 22 tight end in startups, and he's being drafted at the back of the 15th round, the 15-11. And his season was cut short due to injury, unfortunately. But and it is really unfortunate because he was starting to really come on in this offense when he did get hurt, and making a name for himself on that team as, hey, this is the guy at tight end. So uber athletic, just an ultra athletic guy at the position, which we liked a lot as a prospect coming out. And I think that if the quarterback situation improves, which we all expect it to, it can't get a whole lot worse, that Theo Johnson certainly has a bright future. So I think that you could certainly make the case that he, belongs even higher on this list. I think he's somebody that you could compare with Jatavian Sanders. And so that's why, again, all these players are in tier 5 for me. So they're all kind of in that same range. It just comes down to what you need on your roster, whether you're aiming for that younger player with the higher risk, or you need that veteran where, okay, the ceiling's not going to be as high, but the floor is going to be, better for your team. So it just comes down to what you need between, Sinnott, Sanders, Johnson in this range versus the Goedert, Schultz, Henry. And, I like all the options available. I think this is a really nice area in drafts to add a couple of these players in startups to pair with another tight end somewhere else in the draft. All right, so before we sign off for today's show, I just want to name drop a few other players that I think would probably be the next few names in these rankings that I think represent a pretty good value, or just players that I think are worth a dart throw in startups. So Brenton Strange from the Jaguars, he's 24. He's going in the 18th round, and he's somebody that, should the Jaguars move on from Evan Ingram, might represent a nice value. He showed some flashes at the end of the year when Ingram was hurt, and he was a second-round pick. So I think there is something to be had there, and for an 18th-round pick, could be a nice little value. A.J. Barner from the Seattle Seahawks, I think that there's a decent chance he takes over that starting job from Noah Fant in Seattle. He's only 22 years old. He's going in the 21st round. So another player that I think is worth the dart throw. And another rookie, Eric All, coming off another major injury. So fortunately, that's a bit That's really unfortunate there, but certainly some room, for him to shoot up rankings should he come back and be healthy as a part of that Cincinnati Bengals offense. Another player, just keep an eye on Mike Gesicki, who had a pretty good season. Just see where he goes, if he re-signs or what the deal is there. But at the moment, not a guy in my top 24. And then Chig Okonkwo is the last guy on this list who is the consensus number 23 tight end. And he's being drafted in the 16th round. And he probably, very good chance he would have been my number 25 tight end. But he's just somebody else that I think makes some sense in this range that had a nice season last year in Tennessee and is still on the younger end. So there's a few extra names for you. And if you made it this far, just so you have some nice little dart throws at the end of your drafts. And with that being said, thank you all so much for tuning in. I appreciate all of you. And we'll be back next week, hopefully back to our usual Monday schedule. And we're going to be shifting our focus away from startups and getting back into some more rookie talk. The combine is approaching. We got some rookie drafts, rookie mock drafts to talk about. So a whole lot going on the prospect front. So we're going to be diving into more of those players and this rookie class that is so far shaping up to be very running back heavy and kind of a big disappointment otherwise. So we'll get into all of that next week and beyond. Thank you so much for tuning in. You've been listening to the Dynasty War Room podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Valancourt, and we will see you all next week.